What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. It's Thursday. It's time to go game by game, talk about all the players I'd be starting and sitting this week. Gonna be a long one. Sit back, hit the like button. Let's start things off. Thursday night game, Vikings at Rams, 48-point total. Vikings 3-point road favorites. For the Vikings, the Rams do not have a strong defense. This game is being played in a dome. Vikings have a relatively consolidated offense, and so Darnold, mid-range quarterback one. Aaron Jones, Justin Jefferson, must starts. Your only real decision comes down to Addison. Right now, he's projecting as a wide receiver 26. As you know, I do a huge update after this video, and I do smaller updates throughout the rest of the week. So not guaranteed to stay at exactly wide receiver 26, but I feel pretty good about him this week. The Rams' pass defense has been improving as the season has gone along. Remember, we opened the season where it was like the Commanders and the Rams were just absolutely pathetic in pass defense. They've both been improving, but they're still giving up the fourth most yards per pass play. They've allowed the ninth highest EPA per pass play. And despite applying the fourth most pressure, they only rank 24th in sack rate. So they're not as bad as they were to start the season, but they're still below average. And I do think Addison has enough of a ceiling for him to be a very quality play in your flex spot. And then I don't think if they did activate Hawkinson, I don't know that he's going to be activated, but if they did activate him, I don't think I would play him this week. I would want to see him go out there and have like a decent snap share for a week before starting him, unless maybe they hold him out and next week he's like full practices every single day. Then I'd have more confidence. I don't have enough confidence in his playing time right now if they were to activate him. For the Rams side, we're expecting Cooper Kupp back this week, which makes the Rams offense pretty easy to break down. We know the Vikings have an extraordinarily good defense, one of the best defenses in the league, but how you beat them is like they did with Amon-Ra St. Brown last week. Slot wide receivers who especially are like blitz beaters, I guess, players that when they know the blitz is coming, you can get the ball up very quickly. That is Cooper Kupp. It's just Cooper Kupp, Kyren Williams, bench everyone else. Again, I said we'll maybe stream Stafford at times this season, but when it's a better matchup and when Puka is back, for now, Kyren, start. Kupp, at this point, you don't need to go to the secondary wide receivers because it's a bad matchup, and we know that Kupp is going to demand a massive target share. If you absolutely needed to in a deeper league get 2-2 and you're just hoping for a long play, sure. If you absolutely needed Parkinson, hoping for like 4 for 40, sure. Again, ideally, it's only Kupp and Kyren. Next up, we have Ravens at Browns, 44.5-point total. Ravens 9-point road favorites. For the Ravens, the Browns are a mostly neutral matchup, but they are negative for tight ends. Andrews has gotten going last 2 weeks. He had 1 touchdown 2 weeks ago, 2 touchdowns last week. Still just a streaming option. And to be honest, both tight ends remain streaming options. Both are kind of lower end streaming options this week. They are 9-point road favorites. And so if these two get involved early, if these two are the reason they get ahead with touchdowns, you're going to be happy you started them. Expected game script is not Baltimore throwing the ball a ton. And so it's unlikely, especially in the worst matchup among all players here, at least on the team, obviously, it's not a good spot for Andrews and likely. So you're basically just praying for touchdown, which again, that's just what happens with streaming options. So they're streaming options. I do think that I roll with Flowers either as like a low end 2, maybe more ideally in the flex spot. Understand he comes with the same risk as Andrews, as likely that if they get up early with other players, kind of like they did last week, there's not going to be a need to throw it. And so you're not going to see a great game from Flowers. Derrick Henry must start. Obviously, he's got a 29-point lead on the running back 2 through 7 weeks. He's a 9-point favorite. So again, get him in starting lineups. And then same with Lamar. He's got a 15-point lead on the quarterback 2. Get him in the starting lineups every week. For the Browns, finally time. We knew it would happen sooner or later, but Jameis Winston is going to draw the start this week. Tough to project him super well given the current wide receiver room being 9-point home underdogs on a team projected to score less than 18 points against a quality defense. But I do think he's worth kind of a speculative add just in the off chance that he does go off. He does a really good game, even in a tough matchup. I would just keep him on the bench. So it'd be more like if you've got a deeper bench, if you've got the opportunity to add him, to roster him, but to maybe not start him this week, I think that's totally fine. Believe it or not, though, Baltimore, They rank 4th worst in EPA per pass allowed. They have allowed the 5th most yards per passing play. They're facing the 3rd highest opponent pass play rate, so teams are throwing the ball a lot against them. They struggle with tackling. They've allowed the 3rd most yards after the catch over expectation. They've allowed the 3rd most passing touchdowns. They've allowed the most passing yards per game. So there is still a chance there that Winston gets going this week. So if you need a Hail Mary at quarterback, again, not going to project well because there are a lot of players on this team that aren't going to be efficient through the air, at least from what we've seen this season. But there's a chance that maybe Winston turns that around. Maybe he goes out there and has 250 and 3 touchdowns, and you're happy with the start. So not the worst play in the world. Again, just not going to project well. As to the pass catchers, Njoku's a must start. I think Jeudy is flex viable, but he's Jerry Jeudy. He could easily drop like 6 passes. Probably don't need to go there with Jeudy, but if you had to play him, I think that's completely fine. And then I don't hate Cedric Tillman in the flex as well, but he's going to project worse than Jeudy. So I would want to see it with him again. I think he was a great add this week on waivers because if he goes out there and he commands another 10 targets, he's being used downfield. He's a clear outside wide receiver, running a ton of snaps and getting targets from Winston. And Winston looks good. Like, there's a world where we're like, okay, are we starting Tillman in the flex every week? I don't know that that's going to happen. And again, even though Baltimore has been way worse than expected against the pass, I still can't just view them as like a bad defense and attackable pass defense. But if it happens again for Tillman, we're going to be pretty excited. So again, a good ad, but it's unlikely with 0 teams on bye. You have to start Cedric Tillman this week. But the Browns, again, the Browns are going to have to throw the ball a lot this weekend. Winston is going to push the ball downfield. That could easily lead to an implosion spot as well, where he like throws 3 picks early. Baltimore sits on a lead and we're like, oh, that was unfortunate. But it could also unlock these skill players. And so I think there's upside, maybe more upside than the projections will show with everyone on this offense. Running backs, though, not in love with them. It would really only be Nick Chubb hoping for a touchdown, but definitely not a spot I expect good results from the running backs this week. Next up, we have Colts at Texans, 46-point total. Texans, 5-point home favorites. For the Colts, the Texans are a fairly neutral matchup, but are a -1 for tight ends. Doesn't really matter when you're facing Indy, though. It's not like we're starting any of their tight ends. Big news here is JT. If JT plays, play him. If he's out, Goodson has just been better than Trey Sermon, and so if you need to use one of the backups, I would use Goodson over Sermon. As for the wide receivers, Downs, Pittman, those are the only 2 seeing over 7.5 expected points per game. It would be lovely if AD Mitchell got more involved, or if they just went full on into Alec Pierce and he was getting more deep looks. But the fact that they kind of split a lot of the stuff, the fact that neither of them sees like a full workload means that unless you're in like a 16-team league, can't trust either of them. And even Downs, Pittman, they're only projecting right now as the wide receivers 37 and 38. Pittman, honestly, playing through this back injury, to his credit, he's playing a lot better than I think most people would. I think most people would have gone on IR, would be sitting out these games. So the fact that he's playing through it and playing pretty well with a lot of snaps is impressive. They honestly went more run heavy last week versus Miami just because they got up. And it was like, you look at the Miami offense when they didn't have Tua and it was embarrassing, right? So it made sense that they weren't going to go out there and have like a 70% pass rate or anything. It's like, well, we can run it against Miami. We're a decent rushing offense. There's no need to have AR drop back a ton and make some mistakes. We think we can win this game kind of on the ground. I doubt that they can trust that same style because it wasn't like they got up by 20 points, right? I think they only scored 16 in total. I don't think that's going to happen this week in Houston. I think they understand that Houston obviously has a much better offense than Miami does without Tua. And so I would expect a little bit more passing. AR has been wildly inaccurate, though, this season. If that keeps up, I do think they'll go back to Joe Flacco and just have him develop a little bit more on the bench. He projects as like a high-end quarterback, too, thanks to his rushing. He had 14 carries last week. In 5 career quarters against Houston, this is the one team that he's done really well against. He's got 359 total yards, 5 touchdowns. We'll see. Overall, just a streaming option. I would probably prefer to bench Richardson for the time being. Keep him on the bench. If you've got a relatively decent streaming option, until Richardson starts to play better, then you can go there. And you hope that happens, right? You hope that it's like, okay, I bench him, he goes off for 30. Because then maybe you can use him going forward. You're hoping you don't bench him and he scores 10 every week, because at this point we're going to be cutting him very soon. And honestly, if you did cut him and you were going with someone like Purdy, Caleb Williams, Sam Darnold, Geno Smith, those guys, that would be totally fine to do. I think the preference is definitely, if you have the bench spot, to keep him on the bench and to be streaming someone else. But if you have to cut him, I do think it's totally fine. But yeah, you're starting JT if he plays. You're probably sitting on Anthony Richardson on the bench. And then I really do think Pittman Downs are kind of those like viable flex plays, but not ones I'm super excited about. Not ones that should be in your wide receiver 2 spot. Really should be in the flex if you need them. Then for the Texans, it was a brutal game through the air for them last week against a very, very strong Packers pass defense. The Colts defense isn't trash, but it's closer to league average. It is not as good as the Packers are. They definitely have a much worse pass rush as well, much worse secondary than the Packers. Indy also allows a lot of opponent plays, and so we should get a pretty strong volume here from the Texan side. I view all of Mixon, Diggs, Dell as must starts, especially while Nico is out. Stroud, quality streaming option, definitely not a must start, especially this season where, we had last year, it was like every single one of their touchdowns was being scored through CJ Stroud. They have Mixon now. So Mixon can run for 2-3 touchdowns in a game, and the way that their running backs last season just couldn't. So that's going to really reduce the ceiling or not really reduce the ceiling, but reduce the floor and reduce the chances of hitting a ceiling for Stroud. Next up, we've got Packers at Jaguars, high 49.5 point total. Packers 4.5 point road favorites. For the Packers, the Jaguars have a defense we've been attacking all season, even with bad teams. That's not going to stop against a really good Packers offense. Love, Jacobs, Jaden Reed. If Jaden Reed's okay, I think he was questionable, but I don't think anything popped up. We're too concerned about that, but verify that. But those three, if they play, must starts. Dobbs, I think, is a pretty strong flex play. Again, this is a very, very, very good matchup. This is one of the teams where it's like you kind of want to be getting these guys into your starting lineup with the understanding that they're going to have duds occasionally because they have so many really strong playmakers that even when they score 25, 27 points, you're going to have some players who didn't see that much volume. But you kind of want them in your starting lineup because it's such a good team that anyone's capable of 2 touchdowns, anyone's capable of 100 yards. And so when it's a tiebreaker, especially against the Jaguars, you probably want to be leaning with a Packers player. So I would start, again, Love, Jacobs, Reed, Dobbs, great in the flex. Tucker, low end, mid-range to low end, tight end 1, pretty strong play there. Wicks, Watson could be used as like a high upside flex start. Neither going to project well. Ideally, you probably don't play them. They kind of continue to rotate that third wide receiver role, but either one of them could be used as a desperation play. I do think one is probably going to have a decent game. Then for the Jaguars, the Packers are not a defense we want to be attacking, and so they're a pretty negative matchup for wide receivers, for quarterbacks. They are attackable with running backs, with tight ends, so a better spot for Tank Bigsby, for Engram. Tank honestly looks incredible this season. Whenever he's been given any sort of opportunity, even just a few carries, he's looked very strong, very explosive, just better than Travis Etienne. We'll have to wait and see, though, on the status of Etienne. As of recording this, I don't know. He's still day-to-day, so we don't know if he's going to be playing. Obviously, Tank gets a massive upgrade. Obviously, you are starting Tank Bigsby if Etienne is out. If Etienne does play, then we're just going to have to see the reports of what the split's going to be. You would think that Bigsby kind of earned that starting role, but we have seen reports that they kind of view injuries as you're the starter. If you get hurt, you're not losing your job. Again, Bigsby's just been outplaying him all season, so it's not like that was the first time he'd outplayed him, right? He'd been outplaying him even when both were healthy, but again, I'll just have to adjust the rankings accordingly, kind of seeing what happens in that scenario. At wide receiver, I know the matchup's brutal, but at this point, Brian Thomas Jr. is an autoplay. Like, I really, at this point, just don't even care what defense he's going up against. He is so good, and he's so good, especially deep downfield, that I don't think I can leave someone with that ceiling and that chance of hitting the ceiling on my bench at any point. I think you just play Brian Thomas Jr. every week going forward, unless he has like 5 duds in a row. So start Ingram, start Brian Thomas Jr., start Tank if ETN is out. Christian Kirk, probably someone I would bench this week. I actually do have him in a league that has 2 flex spots, and I do plan on benching him. But if you needed him as your wide receiver 3, if I did need him at that second flex spot, it would be fine. It would be okay. I'm just not expecting a great game. And then I never really want to play Trevor Lawrence, even against bad defenses, but against a good defense, I don't want to play Trevor Lawrence. Titans at Lions up next, 45-point total. Lions 11-point home favorites. For the Titans, they traded away DeAndre Hopkins to the Chiefs. Burks is still on IR, so things are a bit thin for this offense, especially at wide receiver. I mean, they really only have Ridley, Boyd, and Westbrook-Ikhine as their top 3 wide receivers. I think they have one more behind that, but they'll have to probably call someone else up. They don't have very much depth, and they don't, like, those aren't, like, world beaters at wide receiver. I think Ridley is still good. I think Boyd is fine in that role where he's trying to get, like, 5 for 50. Westbrook-Ikhine, probably a below average wide receiver 3. It is positive that they're facing Detroit and that, they allow the second highest opponent pass play percentage. Plus, 11-point road underdogs. Titans are going to get destroyed this week. So they're not going to have much time to run it. They're going to be throwing it a lot. And they're already a team that's perfectly willing to throw the ball 40 times. So you would think that this is a spot where Ridley finally gets going. He's had 6 games so far, because I think they've already had their bye. I think he's had 1 positive matchup on the season. Basically every week moving forward, he'll have better matchups. So the hope is, especially given the now lack of target competition, he should have 8-9 targets. I'm projecting for 8.6. He should have in that 7 to 10 target range. It's just that I don't even think it's how is it possible that he's only caught 33% of his targets? Maybe in one game, maybe you go 1 for 3, 2 for 6, but to only catch 12 of 36 targets on the season, to have only caught 3 of his last 17 over the last 2 weeks, how is that even possible to do? Makes projecting him difficult, because it's I'm not going to project him for a 33% catch rate. Of course, he'd be a bad play if I thought he was going to actually do that again, but he might. So who really knows? Right now, he's been wide receiver 33 again on those 8.6 targets, but I do think he's a quality play. And if you have him, you don't use him this week, when are you going to use him? Maybe you're hoping they trade him away as well, but when are you going to use Calvin Ridley if you're not using him as a huge road underdog in a dome against a defense everyone throws against, and especially throws to wide receivers against? Hopkins is gone. This is a setup for him to have 10 to 12 targets, right? So I think if you got him and you're considering it, throw him into the spot. And if he doesn't do it this week, he's probably never going to do it. Besides him, again, in a full PPR league, maybe you can go to Tyler Boyd's desperation play. I really don't think beyond that you're doing much. Tony Pollard, fine as a low end too, maybe in the flex, but I don't feel great about him this week. It's not a matchup where you really want to run the ball. And then it's also not a matchup where we're expecting them to even have the ability. Even if they wanted to run the ball, they probably won't be able to. So not a good spot at all for Tony Pollard. You're going to need an upside, or you're going to need a touchdown for him to hit his upside. Then for the Lions side, J-Mo suspended for 2 weeks. I'm pretty sure that takes effect now. I actually haven't seen that confirmed anywhere, but I'm pretty sure it's the next 2 weeks. I don't think he's appealing anything. He doesn't have a 30% target share or anything, so it's not like it's we're distributing a ton. And we're also distributing it amongst enough players to where everyone just benefits a little bit. I also think it more just benefits their core. So I don't think this means we're going out and we're starting all their secondary players, because it wasn't like Jameson Williams was an auto start every week. He was a good start, but it's not like, Khalif Raymond becomes Jameson Williams, right? It kind of goes to Raymond. It goes to Tim Patrick. Maybe another wide receiver gets another target, but it's not like Jameson Williams had 10 targets every single week. So I think it opens up more maybe design looks to Sam Laporta. I think it just benefits Amon-Ra St. Brown. He sees another look or two. Maybe the running backs get another target. Overall, Titans defense is actually pretty solid. So it's not like Detroit's going to just walk all over them from an efficiency standpoint. It's more that they're at home. They are a much better team. And the Tennessee offense isn't as good. And so there should be a lot of short fields, a lot of scoring opportunities for Detroit. And so I just think everyone who you would consider starting is a great play. Start Gibbs, start Monty, start Laporta, and start Amon-Ra St. Brown. I just don't think this opens up Raymond, opens up Tim Patrick, unless you are desperate in like a 16-team league. But again, no buys this week. So if you're ever desperate, it's probably actually not this week. It's probably when we hit, the weeks where it's like 4, 6, 8 teams are on bye, not a week where, even with injuries, not a week where like everyone is playing this week. I also don't know that I would stream Goff this week. He's playing great. It's not a spot where we expect him to need heavy volume. You just would be trying to luck into like 3 touchdowns, but not a spot where I think you need to go to Goff. But if you had to play him, it's fine, because again, the short fields are definitely a possibility this week. Next up, we've got Falcons at Bucs, 46-point total. Falcons 2.5-point road favorites. For the Falcons, the Bucs are a positive matchup all around. Plus, their offense is very banged up. So same kind of situation as with the Titans, and I guess with extension to the Lions. For the Falcons, it's like maybe, the Bucs are still a positive matchup, so they can still be really efficient. But the upside here comes from if Tampa Bay just falls apart on offense and they just can't get anything going, you're going to get really good field position all day for Atlanta. So even if they're not being super efficient, this just like elevates the floor, because there's always a chance that an offense just doesn't get going, that there are guys, like their plays they're going with, their game plan they're going with just doesn't work. But that can still happen if you're getting the ball at the 40 every single time instead of the 15 or the 20. So Bijan, London, obvious must starts. Don't look now, but Kyle Pitts, 3 straight weeks of at least 65 receiving yards. He's now up to the tight end 6 overall, 8 in points per game. Unless you like acquired Njoku, I think you're just playing Kyle Pitts right now. Behind them, Cousins, solid streaming option. Mooney right now projects as my wide receiver 31. His yardage totals are down the last 2 weeks, but the volume is still pretty strong. If you've been using Mooney, I don't see a reason this week to not go there. He's a pretty strong option to flex this week. For the Bucs, things are not looking great, right? The offense was humming. They were looking fantastic, but Godwin done for the year. Evans likely out the next 4 to 5 weeks. That makes McMillan, Shepard, and Palmer their top 3 wide receivers. That is a cast that was called out for not stepping up enough at the wide receiver 3 spot, which is literally like the 5th option in the passing game. So I know this whole group is going to see increased volume. I'm totally fine if you are desperate and you had to go to McMillan, because I think he's the most exciting, the best player among these guys, the best prospect, but none of them have been playing overly well. None of them are capable of winning in the same way that Godwin and Evans are. So we're not just expecting one of these guys to step up and all of a sudden be the next Chris Godwin, be the next Mike Evans. They're not capable of doing that. I think this makes Otten a strong tight end 1, someone I would definitely be playing. I think it elevates the target shares of all the running backs. Problem for them is it's a 3 running back committee. So if you only had the 2 running back committee, you'd be like, okay, can we start both these guys at running back 2, both these guys in the flex? At a 3 running back committee, you need a touchdown from when you're starting. You need like multiple receptions. Overall, Baker is a much lower end option than he used to be for the time being until they can get Mike Evans back. Otten is close to a must play, but White, McMillan, they grade out around 9 half PPR points. Bucky Irving, Sterling Shepard, Trey Palmer, Sean Tucker, they're coming in around 6.5 to 8 half PPR points. So it depends what you need. That whole group is viable. 1 or 2 are probably going to have okay games, but none of them should be relied on as anything more than a flex play. Next up, we've got Jets at Patriots, 41.5-point total. Jets 7-point road favorites. For the Jets, New England is a strong matchup for running backs, slightly negative for wide receivers, but nothing too strong to worry about. Of course, Christian Gonzalez is a great corner. Hasn't exactly been shutting people down, but he is a corner you would prefer to avoid. My guess is that he'd be on Adams. That makes the most sense, but we've also seen at times he'll just split, right? He won't be on one 100% of the time. He might be on one for some plays, on another wide receiver for other plays if they're like decently close in skill. Still too early to tell if, what the final target shares are going to be with Adams now on the team. But for the time being, we basically just know most of the volume is going to Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, and Adams. They're basically just taking all of the targets that used to be going to secondary players, throw that onto Adams, and then take a little bit from Garrett Wilson as well, and throw that onto Adams as well. So I think you're just starting all of them. I have gotten many questions because apparently a lot of you have Adams and Garrett Wilson on the team. Because it's a good matchup, because we know virtually all the offensive volume is going to flow through those three players, I think you could just start Garrett Wilson and Adams as like a block, as a unit, and say, okay, you're both probably not scoring 30, right? That's probably not going to happen. But one of them is extraordinarily likely to score. One of them is pretty likely to have a good game. Odds are they're going to combine for what? 18, 20 targets in this game. And if you don't know necessarily which one's going to go off, but as a unit, as a 2-block start, they're probably going to produce a decent amount of fantasy points. I don't think there's a world here where they completely fall apart, where the Patriots just destroy them and they can't get anything going through the air. That feels pretty darn unlikely. So I would just start both of them if you can. If you had to pick one of them, I honestly don't have a strong lean as to which one you would pick. My gut says keep rolling with Wilson until Adams has a really strong game. But again, if you've got both of them and it's close, I would just play both as a unit. One's probably doing well, and you can do that. And then obviously start Breece Hall. And then for Rodgers, quarterback 16 right now, I think there'll be better spots. I think once we see Adams fully integrated into the offense, fully playing as a strong wide receiver, going back to the old days of Adams. I mean, I don't think he's going to go back to the old days where he's having like on pace for 1,800 yards, 20 touchdowns, but back to the days where like their connection looks stronger than 3 receptions on 9 targets. Then we can start him. I think more of like a super flex play for Adams or for Rodgers this week. As to the Patriots, May has 100% elevated this offense, but it needed a lot of elevating to be viable. Douglas was sick last week. That would have been nice to know before the game. Worth noting because they were terrible throwing the ball. That's going to help a little bit. But also, he's the only one I would trust. And again, if you're just looking at the box scores and you're like, oh, he did terrible, he basically didn't play most of the game. He went out there, he tried to play, he was super sick, he was throwing up. So it was like he just really couldn't play. I know the Jets defense is very scary, but they've been a lot worse than expected as of late. I don't know that I can see myself playing anyone other than Stevenson or Hunter Henry or maybe Douglas if you needed him. But even those guys, I mean, Stevenson, a fairly low-end running back too. You really don't need to play Stevenson. Hunter Henry, going to be boom bust every week. Had a great game last week. Easily could go back to 2 for 20 this week, but kind of in that like streaming option tight end range. I don't think anyone on the Patriots needs to be in your starting lineup. But if you had to play those 3, I think it would be fine. Again, the Jets, been way worse than expected on defense recently, but they're still good. There's still not a defense I want to attack right now. Next up, we've got Eagles at Bengals. Pretty decent 48-point total. Bengals 2-point home favorites. For the Eagles, it's pretty easy. Without Dallas Goedert, everything is condensed on their top 3. So Saquon, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, all must starts. Hurts, obviously start him. I know Devonta Smith had a dud last week, but it's an elite game environment. I really just couldn't see benching him. Like, this is a game that can go back and forth. This is a Bengals defense we can easily attack. Devonta Smith, of course, has more variance on the low end than A.J. Brown, but he's still a player I would want to be starting this week. Then for the Bengals, Burrow, Chase, Higgins, must starts as always. Chase Brown kind of taking over Zach Moss as that lead back. He had the 2 of his highest snap shares of his career have been in the last 2 games. So they are getting him onto the field more. Touch counts of 12 and 17. He's my running back 27. Moss running back 32. I think both are perfectly fine. Neither one stands out as an amazing play. I think their scoring chances are definitely there. But given that they are splitting the job still, neither one is a must start. 4 o'clock games kick off with Cardinals at Dolphins. 46.5-point total. Dolphins 3.5-point home favorites. For the Cardinals, Tua is back on Miami. So you would imagine their offense goes back to being elite on the Miami side, and thus Arizona is going to have to push the ball, going to have to be aggressive, can't just run the ball every play, more than teams have been willing to be aggressive against Miami recently. No one technically grades out as a must start, but Connor, running back 14, Kyler, quarterback 10. Trey McBride, tight end 1, not the tight end 1 overall, is a tight end 1, kind of in that like mid-range tight end 1 range. Marvin Harrison Jr., viable as like a low-end wide receiver 2. They've all honestly been up and down this season, and this offense hasn't really reached the ceiling that we kind of hoped they would have, especially after like that, what was a week 2 game where they really went off. They haven't been as good as expected. Each player's definitely had some duds thrown in there. But honestly, that's like a group of 4 players that should be in your starting lineup most weeks. This is also a game that could definitely pop off. So I think each player there is capable of 100 yards and a touchdown. I think Kyler is capable of scoring 25 fantasy points. He's had a few long rushing touchdowns. If you were to bench one of them, I feel like maybe it would be Marvin Harrison Jr., but you'd have to feel really good. Like I'd have to be looking at my starting wide receivers and be like, I'm in love with these 3 starting wide receivers for me to even consider benching him. I know he's had some down games in a row, but I think he's a good enough talent, good enough spot. I would play Marv this weekend. Then on Miami, as I said, Tua is back, so just fire everyone up. Tyreek Hill, Devon Achane, even Waddle. I don't think Waddle's going to project very well anywhere, but he's definitely a more of a boom-bust flex play. But I really think now that Tua is back, just go back to getting these guys in your starting lineup. If it's close between Waddle and someone else, he's got 153 touchdown ceiling. Does he hit it very often? No. But he hits more often, 80 in a touchdown. And like I just think he's a good enough play, good enough ceiling where I really wouldn't want to bench him this weekend. Even Mostert, he's grading out as my running back 32. I feel less good about him, especially given that, Wright could easily get a few more snaps this weekend, take some more touches. But really, Hill, Achane, Waddle, I'd go back to trusting them. If it's close between 2 players and one's on Miami this weekend, I think I would play Miami player. I don't think I'd stream Tua, though. The Cardinals do have a good enough defense, a better defense than people think. Plus, there's just no way in the world that they're going to let Tua run the ball. Like, he's going to be going down every time. He's going to be throwing the ball away. They are not letting him take a hit, especially this weekend. So you can stream Tua, I think, in other matchups. 4 o'clock games now. I feel like I said 4 o'clock games kick off. That was the last game before the 4 o'clock games. This is the start of the 4 o'clock games. Saints at Chargers. Relatively low, 40-point total. Chargers, 7.5-point home favorites. For the Saints, not a good spot as, more than a touchdown road underdog. Likely a backup quarterback again. Only 2 that you're really considering are Kamara and Olave. Kamara right now running back 16, Olave wide receiver 30. I do think my ranking on Olave is going to increase as the week goes on. And honestly, I think I would just start him if you have him. He is a great wide receiver. They don't have Shaheed anymore. There's a world where he goes out there and he commands like a 35% target share. I think the ceiling for targets for Olave this weekend is high enough to where I really would want to be starting him. My lean is to play both of those 2 no matter what. But again, if you had 3 options you like better than Olave, you don't trust it with a backup quarterback, totally fine with that. You don't have to play him. I just wouldn't play anyone else on the Saints. Then for the Chargers, the Saints have just truly forgotten how to tackle. Honestly, they are allowing not only the longest time to throw of any defense, but they've allowed by far the most yards after the catch over expected, now tied with the Giants allowing the most yards per rush. It's like whether it's on the ground, whether it's receivers catching the ball, they just can't tackle anyone, and it's leading to a lot of big plays and really good efficiency for the opposing offense. They're now up to the 4th most rushing yards per game allowed, and that's despite 20 teams being run on at a higher rate. They are just not good at defending the run. Over the last 3 weeks, they've allowed 102 rushing yards and a touchdown to Kareem Hunt, 277 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns to Bucs running backs, and 225 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns to Denver running backs. That is not a list of the best rushing offenses in football, and they have still been ripping apart the Saints in recent weeks. Dobbins, I think, is a must start this weekend. Ladd honestly projects well as my wide receiver 24. I believe that's the highest projection he's had all season. Behind those 2, the volume isn't really high enough to trust, but if you wanted to roll with Will Dissly as a streaming option, sure, he's my tight end 18. For the most part, I would stick to Ladd and I would stick to Dobbins. And again, bad week for Dobbins last week, but I would get Dobbins back in your starting lineup this week. Next up, we have Bills at Seahawks. 47-point total. Bills 3-point road favorites. For the Bills, Seattle is a great matchup for running backs, slightly -1 for wide receivers, but again, nothing to worry about. Amari joining the Bills, like that is going to just elevate this offense, elevate the offense's ceiling, but it is going to make a lot of guys a little bit more volatile, especially on the low end. I think Josh Allen is, of course, a must start. I think Amari Cooper is a very strong play in the flex. I think Shakir is flex viable, but definitely not someone you have to start there. And then Keon Coleman, he's going to be a boom bust flex play at running back. I think you're rolling with James Cook, but Ray Davis has clearly just earned a larger workload. And at some point, they're going to enter into a split. I don't know when that's going to happen, but you got to think if Ray Davis keeps playing this well, you just have to give him more touches. James Cook, running back 25, Ray Davis, running back 35. Again, I would play James Cook, but I would not feel good about James Cook long term. Dalton Kincaid did pop up in the injury report on Wednesday. Just pay attention to his status. If he's good to go, he's in that same general range that he's pretty much always in, around the tight end 10. For me, I think you're probably playing him, but if you pick someone up that you trust more, you could still go with them. For the Seahawks, Ken Walker is a weekly auto play. You have to play him. Besides that, we definitely just need the status of DK Metcalf. I'm not sure yet if he's going to play or not. Obviously, that's going to massively impact everyone if he plays or doesn't play. If he is out there, trust that he's good to go and roll with him. And then you're probably honestly not playing JSN or Lockett, but if you had to play them, low-end flex plays are fine. If Metcalf misses, it does bump JSN and Lockett up to like pretty strong flex plays. A lot of volume will flow through them. The touchdown potential will be there, and they'll just have elevated floors, elevated ceilings. I'd honestly find a way to get them into the flex spot, into that wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 spot this week. Only other player we're looking at is Geno. He does project as a strong option for streaming, but I'm projecting Metcalf in right now. If I remove Metcalf and we give more to like Jake Bobo, to tight end, stuff like that, we drop the efficiency for JSN and Lockett, it is likely that Geno will drop and not be as good of a streaming option. But honestly, again, if Metcalf plays, stream Geno. If Metcalf doesn't play, you still can, but it's more likely you can look elsewhere. Next up, we have Chiefs at Raiders, 41.5-point total. Chiefs 10-point road favorites. For the Chiefs, I'm honestly not sure if Hopkins is going to play this week. It will change things if he does. If Hopkins is out, then you really only have Worthy, Kelsey, Hardman, Sky Moore, and Watson, and then I guess throw Noah Gray in there as well, getting the volume. I know they're going to run it. They are massive, even road favorites, and so they're going to get Hunt involved. I think Clyde's going to be activated this week, so they'll get him involved, but they're really thin at pass catcher, and so I would say Kelsey is a must start either way. I do think that Worthy is an elite flex play if Hopkins misses. If Hopkins plays, I still think Worthy's a good play. I know that he hasn't been great recently, but they have no one. Like, they don't have any sort of depth at pass catcher, and they're going to score points. So he's got a decent chance of scoring. He's got a decent chance of hitting deep. I think the upside that he brings, especially if Hopkins is not able to play this weekend, I think the upside that he brings is just worth starting. If Hopkins does play, again, I think you can play Worthy still in the flex spot, but he's definitely a worse play. Kelsey's worse, but he drops from like probably the tight end 2 to like the tight end 4 or 5. So you're still playing him. I don't think I would play Hopkins in his first week unless we got reports that he's going to be 100%. But it's like the odds that he can go out there and play 80% of the snaps is minimal. So I don't think I'd play him, but if you had to, I suppose that's fine. He could easily score a touchdown. I think that besides that, Hunt is a must start until we see a reason not to use him. Mahomes, honestly, just a streaming option. Personally, I am streaming Caleb Williams over him this weekend. Then for the Raiders, KC is not a defense that you want to be attacking. So honestly, Brock Bowers, only player I'd want to start. This is a horrible, horrible matchup for the running backs. Even good rushing offenses really struggle against Kansas City. I would just not play any of their running backs. Myers could return this week. I think he's going to return this week. If he does, he'll be a lower end option you could go to. But again, not an amazing matchup. But I mean, he doesn't have very much target competition. Like besides Brock Bowers, they don't really have anyone commanding targets over there. So he'd be the one I have the second most interest in, but definitely not a must play. Next up, gross game between the Panthers and the Broncos, 43.5-point total. Broncos 9-point home favorites. Goes to show you how bad Carolina is. If Denver is projecting to score over 26 points against you. On the Panthers side, Andy Dalton was in a car accident this week. I believe he sprained his thumb. He's going to be out, so we're back to Bryce Young, unfortunately. Wheels up for the Denver defense, coffins for the Panthers offense. Chuba is really the only Panthers player I would trust, and it's only as a low-end running back too. Young has been so bad, like honestly the worst starts of his career. He was terrible as a rookie. He was worse in weeks 1 and 2. In a road matchup with Denver, not a spot where I expect his career to all of a sudden turn around, so I really would not be playing Panthers players this weekend. Again, you can play Chuba if you need him, but even Chuba was terrible when Bryce Young was starting. Then for Denver, Bo Nix is projecting exceptionally well this week because they're projected for over 26 points. He's got 6 points per game on rushing alone this season. Denver has a chance to score 30, so he is actually a good streaming option. I do think if you look at the projections right now, I think he's going to drop. I think I'm going to drop him a little bit, but again, he's a good streaming option. I would say Javonte Williams is close to must start. They're going to feed him. He's going to get plenty of touches. And again, they're projected to score like 3 touchdowns. That's not something you ever see for Denver. He is a very, very strong start this weekend. And then I feel like they're going to get Sutton going. I feel like, having to I think it was 0 targets last weekend, maybe 1 target, but I think it was 0 targets. Solid flex option. They're not going to need to throw the ball a ton, but I feel like they get him going. He is one of their more likely players to score a touchdown. If you had to play Sutton, I think that's totally fine to do. Final 4 o'clock game is going to be Bears at Commanders, 43.5 point total. Bears 2.5 point road favorites. For the Bears, this is a great spot against a very beatable Commanders defense coming off of their bye for the Bears. Caleb Williams has looked great in recent weeks. I'm excited to see how he's going to look coming off bye against the Commanders defense that has definitely stepped it up, like the Rams defense. They've stepped it up recently, but still isn't great. I'm starting him again, like I said before, over Mahomes this weekend. I feel pretty good about that. DeAndre Swift currently leads all running backs in expected points per game since week 4. At this point, he's getting so much volume and such good volume that I think you have to just keep rolling with him as a must start every week. I'd also be starting DJ Moore in this spot. I think Cole Kmet is a strong streaming option as my tight end 12. The big decision I think comes from Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze. I'm hoping that we get the post-bye rookie wide receiver bump for Odunze, but until we actually see it, I think it's a little bit tough to trust him as anything more than a low-end flex play. Same with Keenan Allen, honestly. Keenan Allen has some touchdowns, but he has 1 game north of 6 targets. He has 0 games north of 41 receiving yards. My guess is that Odunze starts earning more volume at the expense of Keenan Allen, but maybe that's just wishful thinking on my end, just liking Odunze as a player, really wanting him to break out. Again, I think both are fine to use. It's a good matchup. They can both be used in the flex. I don't think you can really use them at wide receiver 2. On the Commanders side, the Bears have a really strong defense. I don't know if it's been confirmed yet, but I don't think Jaden Daniels is going to start this week. Mariota is a capable backup, and they can run the same offense just in a less efficient way with him. If you lost Daniels, I think you just pick up Mariota, stream him, unless you have someone like Purdy, Caleb, Darnold, maybe Geno as well as a backup. I feel like I would just roll with Mariota until Daniels comes back. For skill players, I think it's McLaurin, Brian Robinson as the 2 you would start this weekend. McLaurin, low-end wide receiver 2, Brian Robinson Jr., low-end running back 2, more of a flex play. Basically, just think about how you would view every player in this offense and reduce that expectation by 25, 30%. That's basically how I would view the offense this weekend. So if McLaurin and Brian Robinson were fringe options for you, maybe lean away from them this weekend. If they were clear starters, they move closer to fringe options. But if they were clear starters for you before, I would probably stick with them this weekend and just expect less. And I don't think you're streaming anyone else on this team, even Ertz. Sunday night game is going to be Cowboys at 49ers, 46.5 point total. 49ers, 4.5 point home favorites. For Dallas, Lamb is an auto play. Ferguson, very strong play. Dowdle right now, my running back 29, so more of a flex play. I do think Dowdle will be the clear lead running back coming off of their bye, but at San Fran just isn't really a great spot. I'm also not really expecting Dallas to get up big here, drain the clock with Dowdle, so he's going to need to score. I have the most interest in Lamb and Ferguson. Dowdle is just okay. Dak doesn't project super well. He fell apart last week. Not a super high confidence play in the spot, especially on the road, but I do think he's a solid option. If you've been rolling with him, you don't have a great option. I don't think you need to go out and try and find someone that's going to project for like one more point this week. But if you have another option, you've been kind of streaming Dak and someone else, maybe prefer someone else. So again, that grouping of like Purdy, Sam Darnold, Caleb Williams, Geno Smith, I prefer that as my streaming core this weekend. Dak doesn't really make it into that list. Monday night game is going to be a gross one between the Giants and the Steelers. 36.5 point total. Steelers 6.5 point home favorites, giving the Giants the lowest team total of the week by a good chunk, by an entire point. For the Giants, Neighbors a must start. Wan'Dale Robinson, wide receiver 34, but really has no ceiling. I don't love the spot on the road at Pittsburgh. Wan'Dale has like the lowest ADOT I've ever seen. Honestly, I feel like it's only Neighbors. Like I know that the running backs have had their games, but Neighbors is the only one I want to start on the Giants. They are on the road, playing good defense. They have a 15-point total. Like, I just don't see any way to project anyone else other than Neighbors as a startable option. Even Daniel Jones, like, I don't even know if I'd play him in Superflex this weekend. He's been playing so poorly, and most of that is the touchdowns aren't flowing through him. But in this spot, we're not expecting very many touchdowns on the Giants. Then for the Steelers, Russ started off brutal last week, and he was getting booed a few drives into the game. It was pretty clear after a while, though, that he is going to elevate this passing offense, and they really needed elevating. Pickens, 6th most expected fantasy points per game over the last 4 weeks, and is the single most featured wide receiver in the NFL over the last month. That is crazy. Justin Jefferson is the 2nd most featured wide receiver with 51% of his team's wide receiver volume. Pickens is at 63%. So if you ever run into a high volume spot for the Pittsburgh offense, especially through the air, Pickens is going to have an unbelievable game. I would absolutely be starting Pickens until we see it happen where they go back to having, 2 pass attempts towards him or 2 targets towards him. Like, if they're actually going to use him as the most featured wide receiver, he's going to be 6 unexpected points per game. Like, you just have to be playing George Pickens, especially like Russ was willing to throw him the ball deep downfield last week in a way that Fields was just not willing to do. Behind him, Najee, pretty strong play as nearly a touchdown home favorite. Russ, fine streaming option. I'm just a little bit more hesitant after one good game. I'd like to see it again for Russ and all the touchdowns flowed through him. If that doesn't happen, if they get up big and they can run the ball with Najee, maybe he doesn't have as good of a ceiling. I want to see it one more time. I think if you added him after a strong start, totally fine. I think my preference again is to see it again. But if you just don't have another option, if you've got like an injured quarterback or something like that, sure. But again, I'd prefer if you added him to maybe bench him one more week. Only other two are Warren and Pat Freiermuth. Neither one stands out as a strong play. If you had to play them in the spot, that's fine, especially Warren. If they can get up, if they can sit on a lead, maybe he gets more touches, but neither one of them are that great of plays this weekend. So that was a long one. Please leave a like if you are still here. I'll be updating these rankings up until Sunday, so please check back later in the week, especially as we get more injury news. If you want to join the Discord as well, that's completely free. You can fire away questions over there, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Go there. You'll find the link to Discord. That is it for this one, though. Good luck to everyone this weekend. I'll see you tomorrow for my favorite underdog picks. Thanks for watching.